Get 6 months of local news for just $2. You get unlimited access to the news and information you need to stay connected to your community. Visit inforum.com/subscribe to get 6 months of local news for just $2.
You're listening to Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. I'm your host, Rob Port. If I sound distracted, it's because I've been busy covering this story all morning. I'm joined by my co-host, Chad Oban.
He's right of center, I'm left of center, both sides of the political spectrum.
I think it's cathartic. I think it's a necessary and proper debate. I'm glad we're having it.
And honestly, we have to do better.
Okay, I don't know why I'm getting blamed for this, right? Welcome to Plain Talk, where we talk about criminal defense a lot. And the reason for that is because it's hugely important to all of us, even those of us who will never step foot in a courtroom as a criminal defendant or for any other reason. But also because it doesn't get the attention that it deserves. I mean, usually when it gets attention, it's in the context of a Law and Order episode or a true crime podcast. But this is one of the battlegrounds. I mean, it's an adversarial system. It's one of the great battlegrounds. If you care about restraining government and keeping government accountable, the criminal justice system, for better or worse, is one of the great venues for that. So it's concerning when the public defenders, right? Because we all know in that famous Miranda warning, you have a right to an attorney. It's concerning when the government's not funding public defenders appropriately. Now, we had during the legislative session, and we actually just had him on recently again, North Dakota, the state of North Dakota's top public defender, Travis Fink. And the legislature stepped up. He was warning of a potential for a dire constitutional issue heading into the session. Legislature stepped up. They boosted his funding. We're on the right path there, although there's still work to do. At the federal level, however, we've got problems. Now, at the federal level, there's something called the Criminal Justice Act. And the Criminal Justice Act, through it, funds what's called a panel of attorneys. Now, there are public defenders who work for the federal government, but then there's also private sector attorneys who, through an agreement, work, essentially contract with the federal government to represent defendants in federal court. These people are currently not being paid. I'm reading from an article by my colleague, April Baumgarten. The U.S. government has no more money to pay contracted defense attorneys, meaning justice in federal courts will be delayed in harmed defendants in North Dakota, experts say. Funds for Criminal Justice Act panel attorneys dried up on July 3rd, said Jason Tupman, federal public defender for the U.S. districts of North Dakota and South Dakota. The federal judiciary budget can't pay panel attorneys to represent indigent defendants, he wrote in a Thursday letter to North Dakota's congressional delegation. Joining us is Mr. Tupman, also Mark Freese, who is the chairman. There's actually a panel. It's called the CJA panel, Criminal Justice Act panel. Very prominent defense attorney Mark Freese, private sector attorney with the Vogel Law Firm, chairs that panel. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Thanks for being on.
Thanks for having us, Rob. Glad to be here.
Jason, set up what's going on with the budget, and since April's report was July 12th, have there been any developments since then? Where are we at with this?
Sure. So I think you hit the highlights. This panel works at a contract rate, and they have been doing work for the past year or so. And on July 3rd, the funds which they are getting paid has completely dried up in North Dakota and every state, every district courthouse in the United States, which means that they will have to wait until at least October 1st before they see any of those funds. The vast majority of our panel attorneys in North Dakota and nationwide are small firm lawyers or solo practitioners. And so when you tell them, when you inform them they're not going to get a bill or not going to get paid for upwards of 3 months, and there's less certainty about when after October 1st, they're business people that have to make business decisions. And the business decisions that many will make will be to either turn down cases or to just stop their agreement entirely and look for other sources of income so they can operate their small business like they have been, and so they can make a living.
So, Mark, obviously, you're one of these private sector attorneys who takes on these cases. Knowing some about the Vogel law firm, you guys don't have a shortage of cases. So, are you guys going through this process right now of trying to figure out if doing public defense is something you can continue to do at your firm? Because even, being told that you're going to be paid on October 1st, is there a guarantee you're going to be paid on October 1st? And how are you thinking about this situation?
I think it's pretty certain that deferred payments will be paid on October 1st, absent some type of budget problem where the budget is delayed again. It'll be delayed and paid at that time, and I can absorb the delayed payments a lot better than my contemporaries who are small law firm lawyers or solo practitioners. So I actually reached out to the clerk's office and told them that I can take more cases of this nature now to try to help. I've had lawyers from smaller firms, several of them have reached out to me and said, I can't, that my business model won't allow me. I have payments in the pipeline. They're not being paid. I just can't take more cases like this because it's going to snowball and create a problem. But Chad, one of the big things that I think that we need to mention here too is this: it's not just the lawyers, it's those who help the lawyers as well. We don't have, as panel lawyers, we don't have, private investigators in our office. We don't have sentencing mitigation experts. We don't have the Bureau of Prisons or federal mechanisms to do psychological assessments for our clients. We have to apply to the court and receive funding for expert assistance for things like private investigators. And those folks are also not being paid. So the lawyers that have these cases that are active and they need help are not getting it.
Well, I got to think one of the challenges is even if they do get paid again on October 1st, a lot of the people who have these agreements have to be thinking, well, what if it happens again in the future? And not just small business owners. These are people, they have mortgages, they have student loans, they have, they got kids in college and all that stuff that they have to pay. They're human beings, right? With all the expenses that bears on. One of the things I was thinking, obviously this is not just happening in North Dakota, this is happening across the country. But is there, it seems to me, the courts can't, if I'm accused of a crime in federal court and I can't afford an attorney and we can't get an attorney for me because we don't have any money, federal government's not paying anybody. Are we in a situation now where court cases are being delayed? And what are the costs, incurred by that? Because if somebody's been arrested for a serious crime, I'm assuming they're being detained somewhere, probably not out on bail if they can't afford an attorney. Are we seeing a backlog now in the courts? And I'm wondering what the cost is of that.
So, yes, to answer your question, there will be consequences. I think they are not just short term either. So the result of this lapse in funding is that people might turn down cases and agree not to take cases in the future. For the cases they are already on, they're ethically bound to stay on the case absent withdrawal. So they're going to continue working those cases. But the further we go out, the harder it is to find a lawyer. If they leave the panel and don't take cases again, we lose the experience that those lawyers bring. We lose all their, because many of these lawyers have been on this panel for 10, 15, 20 years. And so it becomes harder and harder to replace them. And they might, when somebody needs a lawyer and can't afford one, they might have to find somebody a little further away, which impacts when they can see their client, how frequently they can see their client. We have clients in detention facilities all over the Dakotas. Sometimes they're 3 hours away. And so the more and more that happens, you're impacting the quality of representation long-term for these individuals that need attorneys. And then you also start to see the delay because of things like that. And so it's not just short-term. When we have good panel lawyers, that experience leaves the door. We can't replace it overnight, and they don't just come back. And if they find other ways of conducting business, the chances are they're going to keep doing business that way, the way they know they're going to be paid.
Jason, some people might be listening to this and saying, well, I mean, just do more in your office, right? I mean, we don't need the private sector employees. But the other thing at play here is there's been a hiring freeze for 17 of the last 24 months. So your office is likely understaffed already. So this idea of, okay, we'll just do more with less in the office isn't an option for you guys, correct?
Sure. 2 points. Yeah, you are absolutely correct. We are understaffed at the moment, somewhere between 80 and 90%, depending on the data point you use, of what will be full staff. Second, our office is already doing more with less, and we take every single federal case we can for which we do not have a conflict of interest. So we are already taking every case that we can ethically take and have continued to do that, even in spite of the hiring freeze. And so these cases that the panel is getting are cases that we ethically cannot be assigned. And so, it's not a situation where we can just take more, because then we would be representing, for example, two co-defendants in the same conspiracy.
Right.
Mark, your role as chair of the CJA panel, is that? I mean, is it? My understanding is, you have a role in like maybe trying to recruit or at least retain attorneys to continue doing this sort of work. Can you tell us, I mean, what's that experience in the context of this, and feds aren't paying their bills for a while now? What's your experience right now trying to keep people doing this work?
Sure. I am one of the panel representatives. So each panel across the states, each state has at least one federal district. Some have multiple federal districts. There are 94 federal districts across the states and territories, and each district has a panel representative who serves as a liaison between the federal court and the lawyers who take these cases. So for the District of North Dakota, I'm in that role as panel representative. I, in conjunction with Jason as the federal defender, the two magistrate judges, and the clerk of federal district court, serve on a committee that recruits, screens, trains, and monitors the panel lawyers who are on the panel. When I started practicing law some 25 years ago, when you were admitted to federal court, it didn't matter if you did criminal work or civil work or whatever you did. The chief judge at the time, Rodney Webb, said, stop in the clerk's office, fill out an application, you're going to take panel appointments. But we didn't have a federal defender at that time. So every lawyer who was admitted to the federal court became a panel lawyer. That's changed a lot. That's no longer true. We screen candidates, we train them, we expect them to demonstrate proficiency, and they're qualified or they wouldn't be on the panel. So when Jason talks about experience leading the panel, it has profound and long-term impacts on the ability to provide quality representation for those who need it most.
You know, in the article in the forum, former U.S. Attorney Tim Purdon made maybe a snarky comment that people talk a lot about the Constitution and following the Constitution, but in this one, they seem to not care as much. What are, Jason, the conversations? I assume you're having conversations with our congressional delegation and others about needing this funding right now, because I think we are, once we start having, folks who are not getting fair representation, we've got a big problem, not only in North Dakota, but in this whole country. What have the conversations been like with the delegation, with the Department of Justice, with others about getting these dollars out to the states the way we need them?
So at this point, we're just trying to raise awareness and let everybody know this funding gap exists. Because I think, as Rob started, this is something that goes below the radar. I mean, it's critical, but it's also lesser known. So we've just, we wrote the letter, I think it was last Thursday, about a week ago. And then, there have been a couple of media articles we've interviewed, and we had the great privilege of being on this program here. And that's kind of the extent of our involvement. That's kind of the lane that in my position, I should stay in. Direct lobbying is not something I get into. So no conversations on my part. I can defer to Mark for some of that. And I also am very, very cognizant that we just started talking about this. So, and I know some of the delegation indicated they're evaluating their positions, and we just hope for their support.
Mark, have you had any conversations, or what are you sensing in terms of getting this money moving?
Yeah, and I've reached out to everyone who will listen. My role is to stick up for the panel and to make sure that they have the resources necessary. Jason had mentioned before that these costs are going to evolve, and what happens is it becomes more expensive. The reality is, I think our lawmakers know that if you slow down this process, if you keep pretrial detainees away from their lawyers for longer periods of time, the cost of that just gets moved from the judiciary, which pays for the panel lawyers. It gets moved over to the U.S. Marshals, right? So the costs end up being borne somewhere else. Our delegation, I think, understands and recognizes that these are individuals, like Rob said, human beings, people who are coaching the baseball team for the summer, people who are on the church council, people who sit on the city commission. Some of these panel lawyers that we have are part-time state's attorneys that are in solo practice. Our delegation gets that. And more importantly, our governor gets that. Our governor is a former panel lawyer. Chad, you mentioned our former U.S. Attorney, Tim Purdon. I took Tim's role as the panel representative when he became U.S. Attorney. So we have people within our system, within our state, with unique, one-of-a-kind experiences who are sympathetic to this and can help our delegation know how impactful this is here at a local level. And the funding that's being requested here, only a small portion of that would apply to North Dakota because there's so many of these cases and so many lawyers across the country. So yes, we've been active trying to educate folks.
Talking about the costs incurred by delaying the funding, at what point are we in, and again, I'm thinking to our friend Travis Fink talking about similar situation at the state level, talking about there being on the edge of a constitutional crisis. I mean, that's what Chad's question was. Again, Americans are guaranteed a right to legal counsel. So, at what point, if this plays out, are we putting ourselves in jeopardy of costly litigation from criminal defendants suing over their constitutional right to counsel being violated?
Well, and I can take a stab at that. Jason handles federal cases every day. He's maybe more insightful. But what I can tell you is it's not just the direct lawsuits. The government's generally immune from lawsuits of that nature. I have less fear about the cost of that. The greater fear that I have is the loss of experience and then the process of post-conviction relief proceedings. They're very complex in federal court and referred to as 2255 proceedings. If defendants have not received competent representation, they come back to the court and start with new hearings, new evidence, new background information, and basically try to start over in the criminal case through a separate ancillary proceeding, in addition to appeals that may result from the case when it is finally adjudicated. It's really, really difficult to measure the cost of that, but the likelihood of it is great. When defendants are not given the representation they need, when they don't have the experts or the mitigation help that they have for their sentencing, they're going to raise issues, and that costs money.
So, Jason, just sort of pulling back a little bit, what percentage of North Dakota cases do have a court-appointed counsel?
So,
and how many of those do you guys take versus people on the panel take?
Yeah. So nationally, 90% of individuals who find themselves charged in federal court need a court-appointed lawyer. And so I have not seen an exact statistic in North Dakota. I would imagine it varies year to year, but I would bet it's right around that mark. Very, very few people are able to afford their own lawyer when they have some case pending against them in federal court.
And just for context, I think at the state level, Travis Fink told us the number was just north of 80%.
Yeah. So that tracks, and I think that would be very close. And then for new criminal filings, I would say between 60-40 to 2/3, 1/3. The Federal Public Defender's Office gets the greater share of those, probably 60 to 66%. All of those would be the max number of cases that we can ethically handle, and then the panel gets the remainder. There are variables that go into that. What kind of charges are being filed? What are the priorities of the U.S. Attorney's Office? We are a reactionary group, so we read the indictments, we don't write them. But that number, I think, tracks pretty close to norms in North Dakota as well.
So what is a good? Obviously, to get the funding out the door, right? But what does good action look like in response to this? From our government to recognize that, there's a problem here. Let's plug the hole. Let's address it.
We need a supplemental funding bill. Congress passes supplemental spending bills, all the time. Needs come up, and our hope is that this would be a portion of any supplemental spending bill. Nationally, we need about $115.7 million to cover the bills that are already owed and to pay the people that we already owe money to. And so it's not a future thing. We're talking about just paying our debts. And so that would be the action we would need.
And we were probably neglected. We should have asked this question out first. How did we end up here? Was there a cut in a budget? Did demand for the services grow? I mean, what happened?
I think the Defender Services Office budget has been held at about the same level for the last several years, and it didn't adjust for inflation. And so that gets away from you. And then also, you guys are probably more aware of just the congressional cycle of threatened shutdown, continuing resolutions, yada, 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 that become the norm. And so, the last couple of years, I think last fiscal year, it was projected that we would need about 2 or 3 weeks of the panel not getting paid. It didn't turn out to be the case. This year, they projected it sometime in mid-July, and it actually happened in early July. And so it's just a function of there being no increase despite an increase in cases and inflation.
Yeah, and this isn't a partisan statement, because I think we've got just chaos in Washington and there's lots of blame to go around. And I think it's important that folks understand the chaos in Washington does have these effects, right? I mean, and it's not Democrats, it's not Republicans, it's just Washington needs to get their stuff together in order to avoid these things. Mark, go ahead.
Well, the nonpartisan point is an excellent point, and it's one that we take a lot of pride in being a nonpartisan group, right? We represent individuals. We do not represent interests. And so we take cases, whatever the law enforcement priority of any administration, we are on the other side of that. This office and this panel has represented George Floyd protesters, and they have represented January 6th defendants. This is a non-political group of individuals who represent individuals, treat them with dignity, and do so every day pretty quietly. And to not pay them for the work they're already done can be crippling to them and crippling to our future functioning.
And Mark, just one other quick question. I assume that most private attorneys could make more. I mean, this isn't like a huge lucrative, like you're getting paid tons more for an hour working for the federal government. Right. So this is a bit of public service on behalf of the private sector attorneys. Is that a correct statement?
It's more than correct, and it's not just the hourly rate. There's case compensation maximum for these appointments as well. And to back up one step, about 96 to 98% of federal criminal cases are resolved without a trial. That's the reality. That's what the numbers show. A lot of it is pretrial work. A lot of it is plea bargaining. A lot of it is sentence mitigation work. The few cases that do go to trial require even more work. But the Congress has established case compensation maximums in that environment, knowing most of these cases don't go to trial. The truth is the amount of discovery, the volume, the complexity of these cases, almost always we exceed those case maximum limits. And as a result, oftentimes you can apply for excess funding, but oftentimes it's discounted or it's not paid at all. So on the back end, we kind of get a haircut on this, but also for the prevailing hourly rate. And a lot of your listeners are going to say $175 an hour, that's crazy. That's less than half the market rate. That's less than half the prevailing rate if you were to come to me in my private practice to hire me for representation. And quite frankly, if you look at it, that pays for the overhead for the office, that pays for the legal help. When I take my car in the mechanic shop, the prevailing rate in North and South Dakota is $150 an hour. So we're paid $25 more an hour than a mechanic shop, essentially. So yes, it is a big public service, and the guys who take these cases and the gals who take these cases do so out of a sense of commitment to the panel and a desire to help. They don't do it to make money.
Mark, Jason, thanks for your time.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, guys. Nice to meet you, and thanks for having us.
Hey, Plain Talk listeners, have something to say? Call or text Plain Talk with your questions, comments, or headlines you want us to cover.
Just dial 701-587-3141. Leave us your message or shoot us a text with your name and location, and you could be featured on an upcoming show.
Hi, my name is Ashley, and I am in Jamestown.
Hey, Rob and Chad. My name's Tony. I live in Grand Forks.
That's 701-587-3141.
Call us, text us, vent, praise.
We want you in the conversation. Thanks for being part of the show.
Now let's get back to today's episode.
Welcome back. And, you know, the justification, that whole conversation you just listened to with Jason Tupman, and he's a federal public defender, and Mark Freese, who's part of the CJA panel for public defenders. The justification for a lot of what's going on in federal government is that the national debt and the deficit, so we got to cut spending. But what's going on in the federal public defender's office is not saving us any money, because what happens is if you delayed these processes, that means people end up spending more time in prison, and while they're awaiting trial, I mean, pre-trial detention and all that stuff, that has a cost. If they end up not having a very good attorney, or not having an attorney who can be as effective maybe as they can be, you end up with more appeals. That's more time in court. It doesn't save us any money. And then also it means that we're failing, or maybe not doing as well, at the very least, not doing as well as we could be doing in fulfilling our constitutional obligations to our citizens. So, you know, this is the issue. And it's just, it makes absolutely no sense that we would be creating chaos here. We can have all sorts of debates about all sorts of federal spending and whether or not it should be cut, but this is not really something that's debatable.
Yeah. I think it's when I saw this article and you and I talked about the fact that we just had Travis Fink on, and we'd also talked about some of the chaos in Washington. I feel like this is such a perfect example of the chaos in Washington has real effects on things, right? I mean, we've talked about the federal freeze on education funding. Again, that's creating chaos for no reason. This is creating chaos for no reason. And we need a functioning federal government and a Congress that maybe stands up to the administration a little bit and does the right things. I mean, we've also seen some of the funding cuts around the big, beautiful bill with senior providers and folks with disabilities. Like, these have real life consequences. And it's also one of the real life consequences. If we want to fund these things, we need to have revenue to fund those things. And so, you know, you've said often, we need to have a hard conversation. We do need to have a hard conversation. And we need to accept the fact that if we're not going to produce the revenue, because we have these big tax cuts going through to fund things, these are the kind of ramifications we're going to have. But this one, it's a constitutional duty to get fair representation for folks. And 90% of people who come through the federal courts need a public defender. 90%.
That's not surprising. I mean, how many Americans can afford to spend $175, $200 more? I mean, $175 is what the federal government's reimbursing them at. You go outside of the federal public,
double that, triple that.
Yeah, significantly more than that. So, you know, that 90% number rings true. Not a lot of people can just pay for that out of pocket.
And then you end up in situations, and I think Jason talked about this, that you don't get as good of representation, right? I mean, you end up with attorneys that don't have as much experience, or people are just being pulled in so many different directions. And you told an interesting story about your previous life as an investigator, and I think it's a perfect example of the unfair fight.
While we were, after the interview, we were chatting just a little bit, and once upon a time, and I should disclose my sister. I've talked about this before. My sister works for the federal public defender's office, so Jason is her boss. But years and years ago, my sister Chris and I worked together for my father for a private investigation firm, and we would sometimes take federal criminal cases. And we had taken one out of Belcourt, and it was a murder case. It was big case. And what happens is you have the federal public defender, and this was somebody from the private sector who was a panel attorney. And then what happens is, if they want to use investigators or experts, those costs have to be approved by the government, and the federal government typically gives them a budget. And so what happens is on the other side of this case, there were dozens of federal law enforcement officers. There's ATF and BIA and FBI and the whole alphabet soup. And on our side, the investigator for the defense, it was just us, and they gave us a $1,000 budget. I don't know how many thousands of man hours, personnel hours that the federal government put into that case. But I'll tell you, we probably did $10,000 worth of work that we would have billed to a private client and could only bill the federal government $1,000. And we did it because my father, a former cop, is a very principled person and really believes in criminal defense. My sister feels the same way. I feel the same way. And by the way, when we were doing that investigation, I was a lot younger. So it was my dad and my sister. Rob was mostly making copies and making witness lists and stuff like that. So I don't want.
But your dad's business had to eat $9,000.
Well, and then it took them 6 months to pay us $1,000. So we had to carry that debt. This is not a lucrative area. The people who are doing this sort of work are doing it because they're passionate about it and they care about it. But they're also human beings and they have bills to pay. And if you put somebody in a position of, well, you can either do this thing you're really passionate about and represent these criminal defendants who need lawyers, or you could pay your mortgage.
Yeah. Well, and somebody like Mark Fries doesn't need this, right? I mean, he is doing this, and the Vogel law firm doesn't need this.
Vogel law firm is a premier law firm. Mark Fries is a star at that law firm, and could, if he eschewed some of his criminal defense work, could be making a mint.
But they do this because they believe in the system, in the Constitution, and that somebody has to do that. And he alluded to people who are passionate about this or have done this. Alluded to Democrats and Republicans across the board who do this work because they believe in the system. And I think criminal defense attorneys often get a bad rap. But in our country, everybody gets a defense, right? And the guys we're talking about here, they're not ambulance chasers, right? These are legit attorneys.
Like Jason said, they don't write the indictments, they read them. When the government initiates a criminal action against somebody, our Constitution gives them a right to an attorney to make sure that their rights are protected and to make sure that the government doesn't just steamroll them. Everybody who's wearing a We the People shirt and talking about the Constitution, right, left, or in the middle, care about this, because this is one of this is one of the cornerstones of our society. That's how important this is.
And I think that North Dakotans and listeners need to be thinking about, what if you didn't get paid for the work that you're doing right now until October? How would you make that work? Some folks can make it work, but a lot of folks will not be able to do it. And not to mention, the folks the attorneys that are quitting the panel, they still have to go through with the cases that they're on right now. And because they're committed. Ethically, if they want to keep your law license.
Ethically, they can't just walk away.
Right.
It's not like, you're a mechanic who's just going to refuse to do any more work for a customer. You can't do that because somebody's in the middle of a trial or in the middle of a proceeding. And unless the court lets you out, in which case somebody else is going to have to get appointed and they're not going to get paid either, not right away. It's a real mess. And this is one of the areas where, again, I am all for the debate about cutting spending and everything, but this is not, and I'm even for the idea, are there ways we can provide these services more efficiently? I'm open to that debate. I'm sure everybody who was just on the call is open to that debate. We all know we can always do things better, but that's not, people got to get paid for the work they're doing. It's pretty fundamental.
It's the chaos. That's the problem, right? It's not even the result. It's the chaos for no reasons. It doesn't matter if it's the freezing of the education funds, if it's senior centers, if it's SNAP, it's all these different things. It's the chaos. That's the problem. The lagoon funding. Many things. It's the chaos.
Well, I think one of the other things, I had a column this week about it was really about Kelly Armstrong paid his first state to tribal visit to our friends at Turtle Mountain and met with Chairman Jamie Azure, and by all accounts it was a very productive meeting, and that's a very good thing. Coming out of it, Chairman Azure challenged Governor Armstrong to help lawmakers have a better understanding of tribal relations. And as based on the legislative session we just went through, I completely understand him making that ask. And for all the reasons, some of the ugly comments that were made about Native American communities by multiple lawmakers, clearly that's something that's needed. I clapped back a little bit at Chairman Azure because we're still in the midst of a lawsuit over North Dakota's redistricting, the premise of which, at least as it's talked about in the news media, is the idea that the state of North Dakota was trying to dilute the Native American vote. And that, to me, it just doesn't match the facts on the ground. I think Chairman Azure knows it doesn't match the facts on the ground. I think that map that was drawn was a good faith effort to increase Native American representation in the legislature. And in fact, it achieved that by electing two female Native American lawmakers to the legislature. When that map was passed, it was voted for by Senator Richard Marcellet from, he's a member of the Turtle Mountain Tribe, Democratic senator. It was voted on by Representative Ruth Buffalo from the 3 affiliated tribes. She was a Fargo Democrat. They had lots of praise. Mark Fox from the 3 affiliated tribes praised it. Now, I understand the Native American communities are not monolithic. Not everybody in the Native American communities like that map. I understand that. But if the premise is the map is racist, I don't buy it. And that is really the premise when you look at a lot of the media coverage, a lot of the activist comments, and a lot of the legal arguments around that redistricting lawsuit. It's premised on the idea that North Dakota was trying to suppress the Native American vote. That doesn't pass the smell test.
So you mentioned that you clapped back a little bit. So now it's my turn to clap back at you a little bit. I think connecting these two issues was a big stretch for you. I think that both of us can agree, and we've said it on this podcast before, the absolute garbage that was said during the last session by, a series of different legislators. It's because they were racist. The comments were racist. Maybe they didn't realize they were racist, but they were racist. To suggest that, if Chairman Azure is going to ask the legislature to stop saying racist stuff, then maybe they should stop suing about a redistricting map. That's how I read the article, Rob. I don't think that's exactly how you meant it, but I just don't think these two things are connected. With that being said, you've talked a lot about Ruth Buffalo and Mark Fox and this map. When they've talked about the map, they were talking about how it affected District 4 and 3 affiliated tribes.
You're forgetting Senator Marcellet, who is from Turtle Mountain, also voted for the map.
Who voted for it. But in the column, you specifically talked about Ruth Buffalo and Mark Fox. And as we've talked a lot about this, not all sovereign tribal nations are the same. They have different opinions. You just look at a map of 3 affiliated, they're in 5 different counties or 4 different counties versus Turtle Mountain. It's different things. So you could draw District 4 in a way that abides by the Voting Rights Act and also draw a map of District of Turtle Mountain that doesn't. And, to this point, there's been one federal judge who's actually looked at the map, Peter Welty, and he said the original map was not legal. We've since had people who have said it should be legal because individuals can't bring forward a case or other sort of things around the edges. But one federal judge has looked at it and he said the map that was passed by the legislature did not pass the Voting Rights Act.
And it was a deeply flawed opinion. And I know Judge Welty, and I have a lot of respect for him. But one of the arguments he made, one of the metrics he used for determining whether or not the map was valid or that past maps were valid was the number of Native Americans elected to office, while making no effort to count the number of Native Americans who actually tried. We can't elect people who don't appear on the ballot. And the truth is, not that many Native Americans run for office. So we can have a whole debate about why that is. But if they're not on the ballot, we can't elect them. And punishing North Dakota because Native Americans chose not to run for office in some instances, that's part of the problem. I have a problem with that. And you're right. You're right. I don't want to say that because Mark Fox or because Ruth Buffalo or even because Senator Richard Marcellet supported that map, that means all Native Americans have to support it. But if the premise is this map was out to suppress Native American votes, despite that tribal voices were ignored, some tribal voices were supportive. I think that makes them matter. Like it's portrayed as black and white in a lot of the news media that Native Americans are on this side and white North Dakota lawmakers are on this side. It is far more complicated than that.
Right.
Everybody who's really involved and really been following it knows this. And if the idea that Native Americans are not monolithic, then Chairman Azure does not speak for all Native Americans. He speaks for his tribe, and he's a very important leader, and I have a lot of respect for him. He speaks for his tribe. But if suddenly it's not Native Americans versus white lawmakers, then it becomes Chairman Azure, a politician who didn't get the map he likes. And that's in redistricting, that's a tale as old as time.
Yeah, and I think we can all agree that redistricting is a messy, messy thing, and it's very complicated. You know,
lots of people turned up to that process who wanted map drawn a certain way, and they didn't get their way. Right-wing Republicans, Democrats across the spectrum, a lot of people didn't get what they wanted out of that map.
But, you know, one of the things you've talked about is that Mark Fox and Ruth Buffalo like the map of 3 affiliated tribes. I mean, you remember then there's a bunch of conservative folks that then sued the state of North Dakota saying that should be illegal. So, the Bob Harms lawsuit.
They didn't like sub-districts, which to me is kind of a whole other ball of wax, which I kind of agree with. And I'm really interested why.
I think everybody should have sub-districts. That's my opinion on this.
I think if we're going to do it, either everybody has them or nobody has them. But I don't like this idea that, I mean, if you live in District 4A, I live in District 5, which means that I get to elect 2 members of the House of Representatives and 1 senator. But if you live in District 4A or District 9A or 9B or whatever, you get to vote for 1 representative and 1 senator. And that to me is wrong. And it baffles my mind why the courts are okay with this, or why we see this as advancing the cause of equality in political representation.
I think a lot of people would support sub-districts across the state who also support sub-districts in that district. But my point here is these 2 districts have been controversial on both from Chairman Azure's side, but also conservative white folks' side in the northwestern part of the state. But I do have a question. Like, if we end up going back to the original map, do you think that somebody who was elected with the new map that Peter Welty drew should be immediately expelled from the legislature? How would that be handled?
I honestly, I need to put some more thought into that. I don't, it's such an unusual situation that by the way, was not created by the people who drew that original map. I mean, Chairman Azure, they're the folks who drew the map. The federal court they filed the lawsuit.
Peter Welty drew the map.
Peter Welty drew the map. Chairman, but he adopted the plaintiff's map. So arguably they did draw the map.
But it was Welty's decision. It was a Republican federal judge's decision.
Federal government imposed it on the state. I think one of the big problems here is I think the Voting Rights Act, especially as it's been interpreted, through legal precedent that is often conflicting from district to district. I mean, maybe the Supreme Court does need to step in and clean some of this up. If I were the Turtle Mountain Tribe, I wouldn't be holding out a lot of hope for relief from this Supreme Court. They're probably going to lose. And I think that because Representative Jamie Davis, who I think, despite her disagreeing with me on this, I think is just an absolute credit to the state. And I love having her on the podcast and always listen to her. She made a fair point when she said that the courts right now are hung up on a procedural issue, not the merits of the lawsuit itself. But even on the merits, I don't know that, Judge Welty made his decision. I remain unconvinced that this is a problem. And I really get a problem. Like if we're all against gerrymandering, well, then why is gerrymandering in a way that's behooves Chairman Azure and his constituents? Why is that okay, but gerrymandering for other causes is not?
Well, it's because we want a representative legislature, right? We want to make sure that our state is actually represented by the people who are elected. That's why we have these things on the books. But I do want to compliment you. The correspondence that you had on social media, which is not an easy place to have correspondence with Representative Davis and Representative Brown, is the way we should talk about things. And I would encourage legislators to read that back and forth and to learn from Representatives Davis and Brown on how to communicate with people who disagree with you. Because it was very impressive to me that there wasn't name calling, there wasn't frustration. It was, we have a disagreement. Here are the facts as I see them. Here are the facts as I see them. And, that's what we should be doing more in this state. And so I want to congratulate you, but also these two elected officials who are a credit to the state with the way they treat their constituents and people they disagree with.
All policy and ideological differences aside, I think they're both fine law. I know Representative Davis a lot more than I know Colette Brown, but they, both, yeah. I mean, it was a good back and forth. We disagree on this, and I think this is a tough issue. It's district maps are like Rorschach tests. You're going to kind of see in them what you want. Don't get me wrong. We can point out examples of egregious gerrymandering, particularly in other states where it's just Republicans, Democrats. It's just a power move, and you get like weird snake-shaped districts and everything else. This process is abused. Don't get me wrong, but I just what I've struggled with this particular map is that it really did have support from bona fide Native American leaders from multiple tribes who voted for it, who spoke out in support of it. So it's just hard for me when I hear that, the national media is like, well, North Dakota tried to suppress the Native American vote. That is not a fair statement. That is not a fair statement.
One other thing, Rob, that I'm struggling with a little bit is why couldn't North Dakota just let this go? Like, it's not changing the political makeup. It's, the legislature is 81-13. The Senate is 42-5 or whatever. Why not just let Welty's decision go? It doesn't change anything that's going to be passed or during the legislature. It just like we're not talking about the power of the state is in the hands of this redistricting map.
Yeah.
I mean,
not a lot hangs on the stakes are. I mean, in terms of practical political outcomes, the stakes are pretty low.
Yeah.
But honestly, and I think it's another big reason why I have objected to this lawsuit and really have been critical of the plaintiffs, Turtle Mountain specifically, is I think it's because of the implicit accusation of racism. I think that the map that we're going back to now, that Turtle Mountain objected to, I think was drawn in good faith. I think there were a lot of good people who put a lot of time and effort into that map. They created the sub-districts. They were trying to enhance the Native American vote. And then for their troubles, they got sued anyway, complete with accusations from lawyers and activists and everything else that they're racist. You want to know why? I think because they're human beings and they're defending the map that they felt that they passed in good faith.
You know what we should do? You and I should lead an effort to have an independent redistricting commission that draws our maps every 10 years.
Yeah.
No politicians involved. None. Let's have the courts do it.
The problem is the minute you get appointed to something like that, you may as well be a politician. I don't buy in that because it's like when a reporter complains, and granted, I have a very idiosyncratic view of this, but it's like when a reporter claims to be objective. No, you're not. Everybody's a human being. Everybody has biases. At least when politicians are doing it, you know what their biases are. Like when Republicans are in charge of that. If it's an independent commission, I think the potential biases and conflicts and everything are a lot harder to discern. And I don't know that that's an improved process.
Okay, better option. I just draw the maps every 10 years.
Yeah, I would trust you to draw the maps, believe it or not.
You would? Wow.
I would trust Chad. I have a lot of faith in Chad Oban, to be fair.
Oh, that's misguided.
Misguided? Yeah. But, and the thing is I hope people understand I am engaging in this in good faith. And that was one of the things that we were all saying to each other last night is we all share the same goal. I think there are many, many ways in which the state of North Dakota, and more importantly, because the people are upstream from the state of North Dakota, the people of North Dakota could be better neighbors to our tribal friends.
Yeah.
I think there are some ways that our tribal friends could also be better neighbors to the state of North Dakota sometimes. This cuts, and that was really my argument, is that understanding isn't just the state of North Dakota understanding what the Turtle Mountain tribe wants. It's got to be a two-way street. And if it's not a two-way street, then we're just shouting at each other.
And the last thing I'll add is, hey, North Dakota legislators, stop saying racist stuff, not just on the floor, but outside of the floor. And your Native American colleagues shouldn't have to explain to you why the stuff you're saying is racist. We should do some, and Kristen Roars did it on one case where she called out one of her colleagues. But I think we need to do a better job of calling each other out and saying, hey, this is not acceptable in the North Dakota legislature.
Agreed. And point out that even in my column criticizing Chairman Azure, I pointed out he was absolutely right to put that challenge to Governor Armstrong. I think that's a healthy thing. I'm sure that Governor Armstrong accepted it in the spirit in which it was intended, and I hope he acts on it. And by the way, every time a lawmaker in this last legislative session said something stupid about our Native American friends, I came down on them like a ton of bricks. Right. I don't have a lot of patience for that. That being said, I think the lawsuit just has my teeth on edge. I don't think it's helpful. And in many ways, I think probably the end result is going to be that the tribe sets some legal precedents that probably undermines their ability to make these arguments in the future. I think they hurt themselves with this lawsuit, but well, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what the courts do with it.
Rob, let's end on something good.
Civics. Should we talk about civics?
Let's talk about civics.
I kind of, it didn't get a ton of attention. The Greater North Dakota Chamber sent out a press release about it. But there was some when they held a I want to call it like a civics. Yeah. Well, yeah, I think that's what they call it, a civics bee. Where it's just, students competing over their knowledge of basic civics. And the reason why I thought it was important is because every day I deal with the public that has a lot of very strong opinions about the government and not a lot of knowledge about how the government actually works. I mean, there's surveys out there saying that the average 80% of Americans couldn't pass a basic civics test. And to me, that means we're failing as a society. I mean, if we're the whole strength of our self-government experiment that we're doing, in the United States is predicated on the idea that people are going to be informed, not just about current events, but also be informed about how their government works and how they can exercise their franchise and all the rest of it. And a lot of Americans just aren't. And in many cases, it's their own fault. In some cases, maybe we could put some blame on our priorities in education. Suffice to say, I'm not trying to point a finger at any one person. There's plenty of blame to go around. So I really wanted to commend the Greater North Dakota Chamber of Commerce for putting that on. I think that's a positive thing. Hopefully we can get people excited and get kids, some knowledge about how their government works. Because if you're upset about your property taxes, or you're upset about the fact that public defenders aren't being paid appropriately, or you don't like the map that the legislature drew, right, understanding how your government works is step one towards being able to do something about that.
Yeah, I'd always like an opportunity to compliment the North Dakota Chamber and Eric Spencer of the North Dakota Chamber. Actually, it's funny. In my job working for a union, we usually are on the same side of stuff more than we're not, just because it's usually fighting against really, really bad ideas. So I like the Chamber. I like Eric Spencer. I'm glad they're doing this. And one of the things that sort of excited me about reading this article and reading your column about it, I don't know if you remember, not that long ago, the North Dakota legislature passed a bill that mandated a civics test for all kids. And it was sort of a joke because it's like an open book test and kids get to take it until they whatever. This competition is good. I mean, it's going to really get kids that are interested in this stuff to really dive in. I think just a sort of rubber stamp, I passed the civics test when I was a junior in high school. Kids don't actually learn anything through that process. That's just a check in the box. This seems really cool. And our students will get to compete on a national level if they win here at the state.
So, I mean, it's amazing what you can do to reach kids. So I was in 5th grade. My teacher, Mrs. Gordon, she had a unit on the U.S. presidents. And so every week, I think it was like on Monday or Tuesday or something like that, we would study that president and we talk about, when they were in office, what the country was like then, what policies, were famous for, obviously at a 5th grade level. I got so into this, Chad. I bought books about these presidents. I made my parents buy me books about these presidents. I was like researching ahead of time. And I was raising my hand during this segment so much to tell her, well, James Monroe was the first president to wear long pants. And I had all these fun facts about the presidents. she like kind of turned over the unit. Like she would do her part and then she'd be like, okay, Rob, what else did you learn? And I would like read my whole, this is what a nerd I was. But here I am today, right? I mean, you want to talk about where, and also like when we lived in Alaska in Wasilla, my mom was a city clerk. She would run the election spot that was at City Hall. I'd be sitting, she would give me sample ballots to fill out so I could pretend like I was voting and stuff like that. That really inspired in me a lifelong love of government and the interplay between people in their government and everything else. I mean, to the point where this is what I do for a living today. And not everybody's trajectory is going to be my trajectory, but we're all citizens in this republic and we all have certain, that comes with responsibilities, not just rights, but also responsibilities, I would argue. And one of them is understanding how your government works.
Shout out to Rob's 5th grade teacher, Mrs. Gordon. Was that her name?
Yeah, Mrs. Gordon.
Again, teachers motivating folks is always a powerful thing.
She was a grumpy old bat, but she loved me for whatever reason. I don't know.
That's not surprising that a grumpy old bat would be fond of you. I'm going to give out a shout out to somebody else who really motivated the youth to care about civics this year, and that's Governor Kelly Armstrong. By passing his cell phone ban, I think a lot of teenagers got engaged in understanding what the government can do to them this session. I think we've heard a lot from our teenage friends. So, between the chamber and Kelly Armstrong, I think they've motivated the youth this year to get more involved in civics.
I don't know that Kelly intended that as a civics lesson, but hey,
it worked out that way.
You take your wins where you can get them. All right. That's it for today. Hey, coming up on Friday, our producer, Matt Fern, has created his own podcast. It's about that film grant story. If you've been following my writing about it all, Matt's done some activism. Matt is a filmmaker by trade, and was engaging in some civics, right? Engaging in some activism, upset about the way some film grants were issued by the state of North Dakota. He's got a deep dive into it on a podcast that's going to be released soon. We'll have him on the show Friday to talk all about that. Until then, thank you so much for listening. We'll talk again. That's it for today on Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. Plain Talk is a production of Forum Communications Company. Got a question, comment, or suggestion? Leave us a voicemail or send us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. If you haven't subscribed to Plain Talk yet, you can find us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. For those of you who are already hooked, give us a rating or review. And don't forget to share or tell a friend. Special thanks to my co-host Chad Oban, and from myself and everyone at Plain Talk, thanks for listening. Grumpy old bat, but she loved me for whatever reason. I don't know.
That's not surprising that a grumpy old bat would be fond of you.